Paul George to the Golden State Warriors. Not a bad idea. I like it. Kevon Looney on his way in. Meanwhile, Kenny Atkinson on his way out. We'll touch on those things, plus more NBA draft analysis coming up on this episode of Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Go on over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So glad to have you here. I'm your host, Kylan Mills, a play-by-play broadcaster and host with the Big Ten Network, NBC Sports Bay Area, and more. And with us today, we have the voice of the Santa Cruz Warriors among a number of other play-by-play outlets, Kevin Dana. Glad to see you on today's show. Paul George to the Warriors. Some of those rumors are heating up. We'll get Kevin's take on that. Kevon Looney sticking around for at least one more year, where you see his fit being. And then also, we are going to dive deep into some NBA draft analysis because Kevin has just been spending night and day doing research on the books, right, Kev? I mean, this is you're eat, sleeping, and breathing. I don't know if that's how the saying goes. You're doing everything NBA draft right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm getting my Mel Kiper Jr. on, but I've got like charts on 101 players. I think it's up to right now. Some more in depth than others.
Dude, that's pretty insane. That's pretty intense. Well, before we get to all the draft analysis, because the NBA draft, well, technically round one is just about 24 hours away. The Warriors won't be picking until Thursday, but it's right around the corner. First, I want to start with some of the rumors that have been swirling about Paul George to the Golden State Warriors. An NBC Sports analyst did say that he thinks, this is again reports, this is still all very much rumors and conjectures at this point, but that the Warriors and Knicks would both be very interested in Paul George and trying to work out a deal with the LA Clippers. I just want someone who's under 30, Kevin. For once, he's an older player, injury concerns, two things that right off the bat I don't love, but at the same time, I still think he could have it in him, at least for another year or two, to be a legit, consistent secondary scorer, and that's exactly what the Warriors need. They need someone to help Steph. So maybe I'm open to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he would be a legit number two scorer right off the bat. There is no way around that. And I know, obviously, he has injury concerns. He has one of the most gruesome injuries of all time with respect to, breaking his leg with USA basketball, like one of the worst injuries you could, as a viewer, watch. But he did play the most games this year that he's played since he was a member of the Oklahoma City Thunder. So in the most games he played in his 5 years in the Clippers were this year. He played 74 games, and you're not going to find too many players in the NBA who are going to play more than 74 games with, load management, scheduled rest days and that kind of thing. And he was pretty damn good. He was an all-star, again, 22.6 points per game, shot above 40% from three on high volume, 8 attempts per game, 41.3%. So, I mean, he is still very much producing close to prime Paul George numbers. Like, maybe the scoring's down a little bit from where it was in Oklahoma City his second year there, and he had higher scoring numbers each of his last 3 years in LA, but he's still giving them 22.6 points per game, and that is what you'd like out of a number two scorer.
Yeah, he's just casually a 9-time All-Star, does bring a number of things that he can do at a high level. But the biggest thing is just, to me, consistently being able to score, averaging more than 22 points per game is what the Warriors need alongside Steph Curry and what they majorly lacked this last season. The biggest question, though, about bringing in Paul George to me is what you would have to give up, how long he would be here. So, for example, it's like to bring in a 1 or 2 year rental player who's already older. Do you give up a Jonathan Kuminga? And that's where I struggle. I like the idea of making a major move for a secondary scorer like a Paul George, but with so many of these pieces, you immediately look at who's going to be the most attractive on the trade market, and it's Jonathan Kuminga. So that's where I struggle is if he's in the trade package, suddenly, I just don't know. What do you think about possibly dealing Jonathan Kuminga? Like, where's the line you're comfortable with drawing? What would you have to get in
Yeah.
return to be okay with moving him? Or would you not at all? You wouldn't consider anything?
I mean, it's just here's the thing to consider with Paul George. He's got a player option for $48.8 million basically
Yeah,
this season, and then he's an unrestricted free agent. You'd have to be
right,
pretty certain that you'd be able to re-sign him.
right. That's what
Um,
I was saying about the 1-year rental,
and so
100%.
yeah, like 1-year rental for potentially the next 10 to 12 years of Jonathan Kuminga, I don't think is a trade I would want to make.
Yeah. So, all right, Jonathan Kuminga would have to be off the board for either of us to be on board with a Paul George trade. Then what would that look like? So that's where it starts to get complicated. And I don't know how the Warriors would make that happen, but consistent secondary score. You pointed out the numbers and the health that he had this past season. So maybe there's some hope. I want to
Yeah.
touch on the big Warriors news that broke this week. In addition to Kenny Atkinson, one of the lead, or at least the lead assistant, according to his title for the Golden State Warriors under Steve Kerr's staff, reportedly moving on to Cleveland, waiting for the team to make that official. But center Kevon Looney going to be sticking around for one more year. It has been confirmed the Warriors are going to move forward with that $8 million option. Um, I struggle a little bit with this because I would like to see the Warriors bring in another big. I just don't know that Kevon Looney, based on what we're seeing in the NBA right now with the athleticism, the perimeter skills, the quickness that we're seeing with a lot of these elite centers and even fours, I just don't know that he can hang. And I think he struggled this last year. He looked a little bit slow. His minutes went down a big time, in large part due to the emergence of Trayce Jackson-Davis. But then is Trayce Jackson-Davis ready to be the number one option night in and night out on a contending team? Because that's what this Warriors team has got to be looking at, trying to maximize prime Steph, figuring out how to make this team a contender. I look at Looney and Trayce Jackson-Davis and like what we saw from some of the bigs who are in the playoffs. And it's like, are either of them ready to take on that role if this team were to literally try to go all the way? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, quickly, I do want to say on Jonathan Kuminga, I do think he
Mhm,
can be a number 2 scorer, not
mhm.
in the not too distant future. I don't know if it's going to be this year,
I
but I
agree.
do. I mean, he was 16 points per game this year. You'd want your number 2 score to be around 20 points per game, ideally, if Steph is going to give you 25. So maybe he can get to 20 points per game this year. He needs to add the 3, but I do like Kevon Looney coming back. I am all about organizational stability. And I think it's the one thing that I know that probably Warriors fans are can be a little frustrated with. Oh, they just kind of keep the same guys. They don't make they haven't made splash moves necessarily. I mean, it did make the Chris Paul, Jordan Poole trade last year,
Yeah.
but I am always the favor of a guy has helped you win. He legitimately helped them win the 2022 NBA title and the 18 NBA championship. I can't remember how many minutes he played in the 2017 championship run, but like at least was a significant factor in 2 of your 4 titles in this
Mhm.
era. Like I think that institutional knowledge is is worth keeping around, even if he's not going to play a lot. And I definitely think Trayce Jackson-Davis he certainly usurped him on the depth chart, and
Eclipsed him for
I
sure.
feel a
Mhm.
lot more comfortable playing Trayce Jackson-Davis 24 minutes a game now than I would Kevon Looney. But I think like that institutional knowledge is not worth nothing, and I think it's
Mhm.
worth keeping around. $8 million a year. I think it's I'll say this. He has been underpaid on his last 2
Yeah.
contracts.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
so I think this is kind of doing Kevon a solid that I think he is worthy of receiving.
This is where I struggle with the 8 million just because of the Warriors luxury tax problem, the fact that they do need to move pieces like normally and I think in other situations if the Warriors weren't struggling so much with trying to keep the numbers down and the salaries down, like I think great, like bring back a guy who has helped you win championships, bring back a good locker room piece, bring back someone who's going to be able to maybe guide some of the young players. He's great for camaraderie, he's great for chemistry. Like Kevon Looney is loved. Or during the 2022 title run, when he had those couple games where he went off, he had a career high at one point, more than 20 points, like the most he'd scored since UCLA. And like Steve Kerr was like, he's the most beloved player in the locker room. I think there's something to be said for bringing back someone like that. I just struggle with, well, where do you draw the line then? GP2 coming back, another guy that I personally love, helped this team win that 2022 title. The backstory is incredible. You want to see him continue to succeed. But at some point, there does need to be changes in this roster. And now I know Chris Paul is a big focus on figuring out how to unload that contract because it's much bigger than Kevon Looney's. But still, it's like you are looking at returning a number of the pieces. And if they sign Klay Thompson, like suddenly a lot of guys are coming back from the last 2 years where they weren't able to find success. Yes, you want to have those veterans and you like to bring back the culture pieces, but like where do you draw the line, I guess, is a question that I've been asking myself and wondering.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair question to ask because they didn't get it done the last 2 years. On the flip side, they did win more games last year than they did the year before. If Draymond Green wasn't, I don't know what the record was with Draymond Green out of the lineup. He missed 27 games this year. I'd venture to say it was probably like 11-16 or somewhere around there, 12-15. I'm just coming up with numbers, but say if he was available for some sect of those games, it's probably worth another 3 to 4 wins. I wouldn't push it beyond 49-50, but that would be good enough to get them at least the 7-8, if not the 6. And then we're thinking a little differently about this season. And look, obviously you want to win a championship and you want Steph to get that 5th.
Where are you going with this, Kev? Where are you going with this?
But what I'm like realistically saying, only 3% of the NBA can win a championship. And so like what I'm saying is if you have a team that can get you to the second round of the playoffs, you're in the top 25% of the league. And if you can get to the second round of the playoffs, you're giving yourself a chance. I think this team feels like they can probably get to the second round of the playoffs with what if guys make incremental improvements, the rookie, like the Moses Moody class on down, Moses Moody Kuminga to last year's draft class, and you have Draymond Green available more, and hopefully you get similar years from Steph and Klay, like there's a reason to believe, and if Wiggins gets back to 2022 self, there's a reason to believe this team can win 50 to 51 games because they should have done it. They should have did it this year if they didn't smoke so many games and didn't have, Draymond Green unavailable for, a third of the season.
Summertime means baseball, the WNBA, the Olympics coming up in under a month, I think, at this point, and you can bet on all of those sporting events over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right, $200 you can use to bet on everything from who's going to hit one out of the park to who's going to win the NBA Finals next year in 2024-25. In fact, the favorites right now are the Boston Celtics at plus 300. No big shocker there. You also can even bet on who's going to win their conference finals. The Eastern Conference is also Boston, the favorites at plus 25. Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets at plus 380. The Golden State Warriors are the 7th favorites at plus 2,000. So, hey, if you're feeling confident in this front office, you think they're going to make the right moves, you could put your money on the Warriors now to win the NBA Finals or just the Western Conference, and you could win big. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to put a big win on your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It is a blessing and a curse that this Golden State Warriors organization has come to expect championships. The fans have come to expect championships. There's a lot of merit to what you're saying. Making it to the second round of the NBA playoffs in a lot of locker rooms would be considered a success. But the bar is set so high for this Golden State Warriors team, knowing that you've only got a few years left in Steph Curry's prime. You got to think that you got to max that out and you have to try to push to that next level. So what's the move that's going to get them to that next level? Because I actually agree with you. Draymond Green back in the lineup. And then you also look at, I don't know if this is ever going to happen, but like Andrew Wiggins just playing better and more consistently closer to how he played in the 2022 title run. I absolutely think this team goes farther than they did this past season. I think they're definitely going into the second round of the playoffs. But then you go back a year prior to that, for example, where they came up short against the LA Lakers. And it's like, what's it going to take for this group to get to that next level? And how do you bring in a secondary score while still holding on to all these pieces and bringing back the locker room guys and bringing back the youth? And that's the conundrum. Is that possible? I don't know that it is.
Yeah, I mean, doing all that, trying to find an outside secondary score, it is not possible to do
Yeah.
all that. Like, you just don't have the money to do it. So, yeah, no, it's, I guess my, look, obviously it's been an incredible decade. Before this decade, they were one of the worst franchises in all of professional sports, not just the NBA. These are the Warriors I grew up with. I became a fan. Antoine Jameson was drafted in the 98 draft. I am used to years of suctitude.
Yeah, you were here
And,
for the bad times.
and
If you go
so
back
like
that far.
if you get to the second round of the playoffs, that is unequivocally a successful season. Now I know expectations are different, a lot different with Golden State and with Steph Curry, with what they've done since Steve Kerr took over. But like as we said, it's not possible to try to do all these things that Golden State can do, like with the luxury tax situation and yeah, just with salary cap constraints. Like you're gonna have to make some choices, and I lean on the side of keeping the guys that brought you there, even if there's going to be a couple of years at the end of this thing where it doesn't look pretty. I still think it's worth it. Like I'm fine if with Steph, Draymond, and Clay in their late 30s, them still being with Golden State and the Warriors being 35 and 47. I don't care. Like to me, it's worth it for them to retire Warriors. I'm fine.
Wow.
I'm
Okay.
completely fine with that because
Interesting.
I've seen a lot worse. Trust me.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. I just feel like I see such a big portion of the fan base that's on the opposite side of that spectrum that is saying, no, we expect win now, pursue a championship, maximize Steph Curry while we can. And I've been shocked by how many people are saying, see you later, Klay Thompson. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I've been surprised by the number of Warriors fans that have said that. There's a split. There is a split. I think there still is a portion of people that are saying exactly what you said. Like, let this trio come back. Let them retire Warriors. Let that legacy be what it is and be something special, because you don't see that in the NBA. You don't see nowadays players who are drafted and stay with an organization for the entirety of their career. It just doesn't happen, let alone three key pieces that won you 4 titles. That has the potential to be something really, really special. But are you willing to sacrifice the last few years of Steph Curry's prime and to say, hey, we're willing to accept that we may not be title contenders. We may be really good. We may be a playoff team, but we may not have everything and all the pieces we need to go all the way. Now, I do want to also add in a caveat that I think when you go into the playoffs and you have Steph Curry, you can never count Golden State out.
Yeah.
But realistically, when you look at the roster on paper at the same time, is it going to be a clear-cut roster that you think is title contending worthy? There's a lot of ifs.
No.
There's a lot. Yeah. As of right now, no. And I think with development of some young players, you could see this team definitely elevate from where they were last year and Draymond Green being back. But like on paper, this isn't a roster right now to me that would win a title.
I agree. Like, yeah, like for this group to win a championship, 2022 Andrew Wiggins needs to come back. Now, I will think he will be better than he was last year. I don't know if it's going to be 21-22 Wiggins or first part of 2022-23 Wiggins, but I do think he'll be better. Like Jonathan Kuminga would need to be the secondary scorer and a certified number 2 option, like all-star level player, which I do think Jonathan Kuminga will be an all-star or be at an all-star level player. It's probably not next year because he's 21 years old, but like 23, 24 years old, I think that's when you start to expect Kuminga to really be an all-star. Moses Moody would need to be a 20-plus minutes per game kind of guy and give you 10 and 5 off the bench or something like that. Brandon Podziemski probably would need to up his scoring average to the low teens. I'm just trying to do the math in my head of where you're going to get the scoring from. And Trayce Jackson-Davis would need to take a step, and Draymond would need to stay in the high 30s from 3. All that stuff happens, then yeah, this would be a significantly better team. That is asking for a lot of dominoes to fall in the right place. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that guys make steps towards those improvements, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those things happening are very possible, but it's just there's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of ifs. Is Andrew Wiggins going to be playing better? What kind of steps forward realistically are some of these young players going to make? There's no way to 100% predict that. And see, I'm more on the other side. I'm more on the side of throw the kitchen sink, throw whatever you can out there to try to bring in a key piece who can help this team win a title right now. But I still want to keep Jonathan Kuminga. Like, that's the number one that I'm like, I don't think it's worth it if you're letting go of Jonathan Kuminga, because I agree. I think he's a future all-star. I think he can be a future cornerstone piece of this organization, of an organization, and I hope it's the Golden State Warriors. So that's one where it's just like, you cannot sacrifice that type of special talent for a player who you hope will help you win now. And then you look at how many times teams bring in, look at Paul George and Kawhi. You bring in 2 stars and it doesn't work out. So there still is an unknown to bringing in someone who is a proven winner or is a player who's put up great numbers, who has been a consistent scorer elsewhere and maybe not fitting in with the system, not working with Steph Curry. And I know everyone loves Steph Curry and you want to say it's easy to play with him because of what he can do and what he can create, but realistically, like, it doesn't always fit.
Yeah, we saw that with Kelly Oubre. It didn't fit with Kelly Oubre,
Yeah.
and he was kind of like a salary slot saving trade to keep that slot open, and it didn't work with him. His 1 year in Golden State, he had the 40-point game in Dallas. It was like he'd have his moments, but by and large, you could see that it just wasn't a great fit for Oubre and the Warriors. Now, I will say, like, that was the other point that I wanted to make. Like, there's no guarantee that if you go and get like a home run talent, that it's going to lead to a championship. Like the Warriors, when the Warriors got Kevin Durant, created that super team of all super team, the fact that they won 2 titles out of 3 years, like, all right, now they clearly had the best team on paper in the NBA, but like out of all the super teams, quote unquote, that we've seen recently, like the Warriors by far have had like the most success with that kind of set. Like, like the Heat going to the finals 4 years in a row is a big accomplishment. Like the Warriors going to the finals 6 times in 8 years or whatever it was, like with these like that doesn't happen a lot. Even if you like, we saw what happened with the Phoenix Suns, the Brooklyn Nets, all these other teams that try to put super teams together. Just because you amass talent doesn't mean that you're going to win the games. And like, if you have a if you have a group that has had a formula for great success and maybe they're not at the same level they were, but they're still pretty damn good, like I am unwilling to disrupt that for like a 1 year kind of upswing. Like, if you can't get Paul George for multiple years, what's the point, sort of, if you're going to mortgage your future? So yeah, that's where I stand on like things. Like, if you were going to take a swing, better hope you get that guy for at least like the next 2 to 3 years.
100%. Yep, I'm with you. And I do think that the Kevin Durant to the Warriors, honestly, is the best example of that, of super team, superstar coming in and then being able to fit in with the group. And you know how Kevin Durant typically gets pretty unhappy places pretty quickly. The fact that they were even able to win championships and there was some sense of harmony with him, just such a big superstar and a big personality, now, completely changing the role that Steph Curry played. It speaks volumes about the organization, but realistically, you can't expect that every time. And it's not what you see by and large around the NBA.
Yeah, agree. And I was just going to say, like, they would have won 3 titles in 3 years with Kevin Durant if he didn't tear his Achilles. And, the whole team was banged up. If Klay Thompson doesn't tear his ACL in game 6, there's going to be a game 7 in that series. They probably lose that game 7, because it'd be back in Toronto. And like the team was on one leg, I'd probably give Toronto a 60% chance to win that game. But even without Kevin Durant, they were going to go to a game 7, most likely, of an NBA final. So yeah, that's all I was going to say.
All right. Well, we already have been rolling through this episode, but we got to get to NBA draft analysis so we can tap into your knowledge and the 100 pages of notes that you have stacked up, Katie. I guess I want to start with a player who I talked about in an episode recently, and I was surprised to see some pushback on from the fans in the comments. And that's someone you said you met, and UNC's Harrison Ingram has been compared to a Draymond Green without as much of the antics and anger issues and, kind of all the stuff that you see with Draymond Green's ejections and all that. But everything that I've heard and seen about him has been glowing reviews. Initially was projected to go higher in around the 30s. For some reason now is in a lot of the latest mock drafts, including Bleacher Reports, is falling down to the 50s. But to me, I'm like, bring in a great defender. Great. The Warriors need defense. I just think there's a lot of parts of his game that are pretty polished. You said you met him. What are your impressions of Harrison Ingram and what do you think his fit would be with the Dubs?
So I loved this kid when he was at Stanford, and he had a much better
Right. He
year
was
at
at Stanford 2
UNC
years.
this year.
Mhm.
I met him before his second or third game at Stanford, his freshman year, because I was broadcasting his game for rest in peace Pac-12 networks. But what stood out to me, this was game 2 or 3 of his career, and in a walkthrough, he is telling his fellow Jarvis Moss was another freshman on that team. He was telling
Mhm.
Jarvis like what he had to do in this situation for this certain play. Like it just like he knew it seemed like he already knew the entire offense that Jared Hash ran this early into his career. And I know that they have a whole summer before and they've had preseason practice for weeks, but he grasped it to enough that he knew another position, what they were supposed to do, was able to explain it to his fellow freshmen. And when he was in walkthrough, he was sprinting to spots. And I know it's like a walkthrough and you're not supposed to go 100%, but he was playing, even in that walkthrough, he was playing it like he was more brisk than everyone else. He was just so locked in to the game. And like if you read the Sam Vecini scout report, just the IQ stood out to me that day. But the great length, I think Sam Vecini said of the athletic, he has like a +7 wingspan. He's got a 7-foot
Yep, super
wingspan, and he's
long.
like 6'5" without shoes. He tweaked his shot for the better at UNC. Vecini noticed that he takes kind of his shot with a wider base now. And it showed he was a 35% 3-point shooter for his college career, but at UNC he was 39%.
Right.
You like the ability. You mentioned Draymond Green, grab and go. He's a grab and go guy, rebounds well for his size, even playing alongside Armando Bacot at UNC, who was like one of the premier bigs in college basketball. Now, he still averaged almost 9 rebounds per game. Now, why he's probably falling a little bit is because, as Vecini mentioned, as you can watch it, he has a lot in common with Kyle Anderson in the fact that he's a slow twitch dude. Like you wonder if it's playing at his own pace or if he just doesn't have the speed necessary to keep up with NBA athletes. And it also shows in his shot. It's not the quickest release. It's not a Klay Thompson release. It takes a while to get that thing off. And that combined with him being kind of an undersized power forward, it's probably why he is dropping in the second, quote unquote, for a guy who was like a 5-star recruit out of high school and like considered to potentially be a one and done, that he played 3 years of college basketball and could go in the late second round.
Yeah, for those who are unfamiliar, I mentioned him in a previous episode, but Ingram 6'7", 230 is what I'm seeing when you mentioned
6'7" with shoes.
With shoes. Sorry. Yes,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
shoes. So when you do look at height, and you mentioned being a little bit undersized, just to give people context. But I also think a big factor was the role he played at UNC too, not having to be the primary initiator, not having to be the primary creator, not having to always do it for himself. I think really helped those shooting numbers go up because he did have good guards in the backcourt at UNC who could help take some of those responsibilities away. And that's a big reason why I think you saw some of those numbers start to flourish. Good news is Warriors have guards. They've got ball handlers. So, maybe he would be able to slot in and continue the success that he saw because 3-point numbers were the best of his career at UNC. He says in his own words that he sees himself being a 3-and-D type of player in the NBA. So maybe not so much playing a forward position, but more of a wing. What would your take be on that? Do you think that could be a position he would slide into at the next level because of that size?
Yeah. I mean, it's just when I watched him at Stanford, I was so used to seeing him have the ball in his hands a lot, and he doesn't I'm sure he's smart enough to change himself to a spot up shooter kind of guy. If he's going to be a spot up shooter, he's got to get that thing off quicker. And I'm sure that's something that he's going to be working on.
Okay, another player I want to get to because we're already running out of time, but PJ Hall is a very interesting prospect.
Yes.
And for folks who want the Warriors to bring in more size, this is among the tallest prospects of the different players that have been going through who've been linked to the Warriors in the latest mock drafts at around 6'8". You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember if that's with or without shoes because obviously they do have the without shoes as the measurements from the NBA draft, but has over a 7-foot wingspan. So you're looking at 6'8+, 240, power forward, coming out of Clemson, has some athleticism, love to see it, can possibly space the floor, pretty good shooter for his size. But what are some of the strengths and weaknesses that you've seen from PJ Hall's game?
Yeah, I mean, I I saw him at the 2023 G League Elite Camp, and he was one of the better players. Now, with all due respect, and the drop of Mark Jackson, with all due respect to the guys in the G League Elite Camp that year, it wasn't kind of the best crop of players necessarily, but he was good there. He does have nice touch. Now, he didn't shoot the three great this year. He was like 32%, but the year before, he was 40% as a junior, and he helped lead Clemson to their second ever Elite Eight in school history. Very nice touch around the basket. Obviously, he can shoot the threes. I remember in this interview, he compared himself to Brooke Lopez and Dean Wade. Sam Vecini compares him to a Mike Muscala. He kind of says he can be like a fourth big or something like that, but has a great feel for the game, sets good screens, something that Kevon Looney does really well. Vecini likes his shooting mechanics, which you can see, which you were able to see watching him play. I remember that from a G League Elite Camp a little bit. The downside is that he is like kind of just barely the size that you need for a 5. He's 6'10" with shoes, 6'8" I think without.
Yeah.
So like he'd be a very small 5, but I know Vecini has questions about whether he'd be athletic enough to play the 4, and so. Kind of like a tweener of 4.5, and he's not the fastest guy. He's a little heavy-footed. Vecini mentioned that in his scout report as well, and that was something that stood out to me at G League Elite Camp, that he does not run like a gazelle necessarily. He's not going to be like a rim-running big necessarily. So
see, I can deal with the not being a rim running. Gosh, that's a tongue twister. A rim running big if he can shoot, because I still like the idea of just bringing in any big who can space the floor and be a stretch 4, stretch 5 if they do decide to go more small ball 5 and play him at the center position. Like if he can shoot back to those numbers that you pointed out his junior year, Draymond Green numbers, we're just going to call it that now. If you're a big who can shoot 40%, Draymond Green, by the way, has the ugliest shot I've ever seen. I don't understand how it goes in the basket.
PJ Hall's shot is prettier.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just literally was watching the highlights before he came on, and it looks a lot better. It looks a lot smoother. But so to me, I think you can overcome not necessarily being a rim running big or even the most athletic or fastest big if you're able to knock down the perimeter shots, because the Warriors can certainly use a floor spacer at any position, but a stretch 4 only continues to open up the game. And that's exactly what they want to do with their motion offense, create more space for Steph Curry. So that's where Clemson's PJ Hall is a good fit to me, because he can shoot the long ball. Really quickly, we're already wrapping up. So KD, we got to move on, but I want to know who are 1 or 2 other names that you really like for the Warriors to try to target at 52.
Yeah, so if you were going to go floor spacing big, that PJ Hall's probably going to be your best option at 52. Okay. If you want like a live body big who could potentially be like more of a lob threat, but also can make plays with the ball in his hands, Oso Ighodaro is probably going to be one of your best bets, a guy who really had a nice connection with Tyler Kolek, who we're probably going to see back end of the first round at Marquette. Really smart dude. He graduated in 3 years at Marquette and worked on did a 1-year NBA in his senior year. MBA, not NBA, at Marquette. So like he has that, but he's not a shooter. He took 2 threes his entire college career, and they were both his senior year. But like really good floater game as well. Vecini has that on his scouting report. And he has a 39.5 max vert, 39.5 inch max vert with a 6'11" body. So yeah, he could be like a lob threat. Yeah. So I like that a lot. Jalen Bridges is an interesting name, a long guard. Maybe not a self-creator, but great size and frame for an NBA wing, has the wingspan. Guy who played at West Virginia and then finished up at Baylor. I saw him at 2023 G League Elite Camp, and he's just one of those guys, you look at him and his body screams NBA player. Those guys, and then mention someone in the family, Cam Spencer, Pat Spencer, his brother, on a 2-way contract. I remember a Cam walking around Santa Cruz at games at the beginning of the year, before he changed into his uniform with a UConn shirt. And I was like, why is he wearing a UConn shirt? And it's like, oh yeah, Pat or Cam plays for UConn. And obviously he had a really good year at UConn. And look, he's a guy who is probably going to be, national champion, transferred from Loyola, and is going to have a chance to be a guy that could be available in the second round. But if you want bigs, probably Oso Ighodaro and PJ Hall are the guys to look at. If you're wanting, a wing, Jalen Bridges, Harrison Ingram, someone smaller, KJ Simpson. The problem is he's like 6 feet without shoes, but a guy who is really productive at Colorado. If you want another ball handler, like point guard, kind of, a player that kind of Corey Joseph vein, but like with more scoring instincts for himself.
Okay, fair enough. But Cam Spencer, for folks who want the Warriors to bring in a shooter, shot more than 43% from beyond the arc in 4 of his 5 college seasons.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for that, check that box.
Sam Vecini says he's one of the best shooters probably in this draft class. And that includes a Reed Shepherd who shot 52% from 3 this year, but over a 1-year sample size as opposed to, the larger sample size that you mentioned for Cam Spencer.
Really quickly for the folks at home, Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the Fire TV channel's app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus our national shows covering every league. Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channel's app. KD, be well, appreciate it. Try to get some sleep. NBA draft. I know you're burning the midnight oil with those notes, man.
Thank
It's
you.
almost here.
Always a pleasure coming on, Kylan.
Appreciate it.